Welcome into the horse race. I'm your host, Daniel Vaughn. I am a columnist at the Conservative Institute, where you can read all the latest political news, analysis there for your liking. My column is covered there on the right hand side on the CI Digest. On the top hand there, you see one of the headlights that we're going to hit today. Kamala Harris is going to be joined by her VP pick at a Philadelphia rally. So, what we're going to cover today in today's show is we're going to cover sort of what Kamala Harris is going to be setting up for this week. She's going to be rolling out a VP pick, but the more important thing is she's got to actually get nominated by the Democratic Party, and all the various votes for that are going to be starting on August 1st. So I'm recording this late on July 31st. So on Thursday, you're going to see a lot of stories coming out about how Kamala Harris is going to be voted in by the Democratic Party. And this is going to be a multi-day process. And so we'll get into some of the things that are there. And then more importantly, we're going to get into the latest polling, because obviously this is now a race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And so I'm going to cover all the latest national polling, and then we're going to do a few skips and hops through some of the major battleground states and a broad look at all the major polls there. So one of the more important things you need to know if you're going to analyze elections is that it's more important to look at what the polling averages are telling you, as opposed to focusing in on individual polls. And if you've been following a lot of news analysis this week, you might have noticed people talking a lot about a Reuters Ipsos poll or maybe a Bloomberg poll that was run. And obviously those are important, and we're going to hit some of those highlights. But those are not the only polls. And so you need to make sure you're aware of everything that's happening. And so we're going to go through some of the Real Clear Politics averages and get you up to date so that you have everything you need to know there. And then compare that to 2016 and 2020, which is obviously, what we have. We have two races with Donald Trump, one with Biden, one with Clinton. And it's a good thing to use that as a base case for what to expect now. So let's jump into the news here. So obviously the top story, as I mentioned, is that Kamala Harris is going to be joined by her VP pick at a Philadelphia rally. If you dive into this VP pick, what they're announcing is that she's going to make stop, and they're going to announce it in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The campaign is denying that you can draw any conclusions to that, because naturally, if you're thinking, this is obviously going to be someone like Governor Josh Shapiro because they're in Pennsylvania, the campaign is saying that's not necessarily true. I don't know how much I believe them on that, but that's the case. So what they're going to do is they're going to make a tour of the battleground states. So they're going to Philadelphia, Western Wisconsin, Detroit, Raleigh, Savannah, Phoenix, and Las Vegas. So that's all the major battleground states, because you're hitting Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. And the race is going to be decided across those. So, it's hard to doubt any of those. Starting in Philadelphia does tell you where the Harris campaign in particular thinks this is the most important of the states, and that is Pennsylvania. And as I've been harping on here, Pennsylvania is the most important state this race. You can just pretty much bet that both campaigns are going to park some of their top operatives in that state, and they're just going to hammer away at Pennsylvania from now until Election Day. So that's going to happen. There's the stop is going to be on Tuesday. I would expect something about the VP to be leaked on Monday, and then so you'll have the rollout into Tuesday in Philadelphia. Maybe we get a leak over the weekend, but more likely you're going to see a leak of who the person is on Monday, and then the lead out will be the full week. So that's going to be what she's going to be rolling out on the VP front. The other thing that's going to be happening here is the virtual roll call. Now, if you remember, back when Biden was trying to secure the nomination, Democrats actually talked about doing this for Joe Biden. They were trying to ram him through before the convention. And now what's happening is they're going to use that exact same process where they were going to try to push Biden in prematurely and use it for Kamala Harris. So starting on August 1st, there's going to be a virtual roll call of the nearly 4,000 pledged delegates allocated across the Democratic primary process. So all the delegates that Joe Biden won, he's now pushed them towards, with his endorsement, towards Kamala Harris. And so now they are going to vote. So as the story notes here, they were pledged to Biden before he dropped out. They're not automatically assigned to Harris, but the campaign has been whipping the delegates, much like as you would vote in Congress, and getting them to turn over to her. So this really is going to be a coronation process. There's nothing really that I expect here. You may see a random story of a delegate or two that are unhappy, but with this many pledged delegates, they're all going to end up going to Harris, and that's why you've seen such a sugar high of a media campaign for Harris, because they're trying to make it seem like it's okay for all the delegates to do this. You can read through this CBS story where they talk about potential challenges. There's no going to be real challenge here. They're going to have the virtual roll call. It's going to start on August the 1st and conclude on August the 5th on Monday. So that's why I say, look for the leak of the VP nomination on August the 5th, Monday, because we're looking here at that's when the votes can be wrapped up. So you're going to see the full nomination of Harris finished, and then they're going to roll out the VP. So this is going to be a full, just bang, 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 bang from person A to person B, and we'll get all these things over the next week, followed by a battleground state tour. So you got Harris with her VP and the virtual roll call happening this week. So they're trying to basically daisy chain all these positive news stories for Harris from now all the way into the actual convention. And the actual convention with the DNC is just supposed to be a bunch of speeches and a coordination process. They're expecting a lot of protesters and other things to be there. So they're trying to basically cut out any possibility of those people having any impact. You may see them on news stories, but they're not going to be able to change the overall results because the vote is already going to have happened. So that's Harris's week. Let's jump into the polls here. So on the top level, we're going to start here with Trump versus Harris, looking at solely national numbers here, head to head with Harris and Trump. As I noted in my column this week, in the head to head, Trump still holds a lead in the averages. You have two here, a Morning Consult poll and a Reuters Ipsos poll that made waves because it showed Harris with a lead. But if you look down here at the charts of what we have here, for the time that we actually have here of Harris and Trump over the last 3 months, at no point has Harris ever held a lead when you average all the polls out. And that includes July 21st on when Biden withdraws. So right now, Trump is holding a 2-point lead in the averages. This Reuters Ipsos poll and the Morning Consult poll, they have had a lot of they've bounced a lot between Biden +2 to a tied race to Trump +1. So they've been in a very tight range here. So it's not surprising really to see them in with a Harris +1. That's pretty consistent with what they were showing for Biden. These tended to be some of Biden's better polls before he dropped out, with all the others basically being an avalanche for Donald Trump. So this is where we are, a Trump +2 race. It's pretty significant here. You have a Harvard-Harris poll showing a Trump +4. You can kind of ignore the Rasmussen poll here that shows a Trump +7. They're always going to be a pro-Republican outlier in all these polls. But stuff like the New York Times here and the Wall Street Journal, both showing Trump +2 and Trump +1, that's a significant. They're good pollsters. CNN is Trump +3. NPR here, this Marius poll down here with Trump +1, that is significant because they were a positive Biden poll for months before the polls really turned against Joe Biden. This was one that he would even mention to different journalists saying, this is one of my better polls. And right now, Donald Trump is leading it as well. So right now on the national level, if you're looking solely head to head, you've got Trump leading with a few here for Harris. We're going to switch here now to the 5-way. So this is where you start including Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Jill Stein, and Cornel West. And if you look here, there's also a Trump lead here. A little bit easier to read this. Trump's leading 44.6% to Kamala Harris's 43%. And then you have here the third party candidates. No one's bothering to test out the Libertarian Party candidate because he is genuinely a nobody with no name recognition and will probably bring in a percentage that's even lower than what you have here with Cornel West. So he's not even worth polling. I do expect these third parties here to fall down over time and drift down on election day. I would be surprised if Kennedy was able to get above 3% of the total national vote. What is one of the more notable things if you read some of these individual polls of Harris and Trump is with Biden, these third party candidates were getting boosted. So people were willing to vote third party over Joe Biden. But with Harris entering the race, that's gone. They're either bolting to Trump or they're bolting to Harris, but they're making a decision. So these third party candidates are probably going to lose a lot more steam as we head down the stretch, and they're going to start hitting here and heading towards either Trump or Harris, which is why it's important to focus in on the two-way race here. Where Trump had, this is probably signifying where they're going to end up going because you're seeing Trump right now have a better lead in the two-way versus here in the five-way split where it's a 1.5-point lead. So watch this over time. I expect Kennedy to continue to drift down because people are being polarized by this race now. They're seeing Harris, they're seeing Trump, and they're saying, well, I've got to vote for one of them. When it was Biden, they were like, well, I might vote for one of these. That's not true anymore. They're making a decision and they're turning one way or another in one of these polls. So that's the national level here. So what we're going to do real quick is we're going to bounce through some of these battleground states to give you an idea of what's happening here because if you're reading the news you might say, well, I've been hearing a lot about how Kamala Harris is going up in the polls and she has all these great polls, and that's true. She has had some great polls, but what is happening is some of the individual battleground state polls are becoming national stories instead of just a primarily focused on that battleground state. So remember here on the national level, you have Trump +2 in the two-way, Trump +1.5 on the five-way. When we bounce over here to the first of the battleground states, so this is Pennsylvania. This is the state that I believe is most important for everyone to focus on. Trump leads. The best Harris poll here is a Fox News poll. It shows that it's the tied race, with them both sitting at 49%. So that is a dead heat right there. With very, very few undecided voters. That is a very significant tie there. And you'll notice the margin of error in all these is around 3%. So Donald Trump's average lead here is 2.7, 48-45. The first poll we're going to note here is this Bloomberg Morning Consult. So you might remember, I mentioned Morning Consult over here. Their national poll is a Harris +1 right now. And this is going to be a specific set of polls they ran with Bloomberg, and they hit each one of the battleground states with this. So this is going to be different from their national poll, which showed a Harris +1. But you're going to see here they have Harris leading in a bunch of these states, which is why there's been so much news here that Harris is doing well. But you'll note here in Pennsylvania, Trump is leading. Now, if Trump just flat out wins Pennsylvania, his ability to win on election night opens up exponentially. It would be very easy for him to win because all he'd have to basically do is pick up a state or here after that, whereas Harris would have to basically sweep the rest of the battleground states if she loses Pennsylvania. That's how important the state is. So Trump leading in Pennsylvania is a significant sign here. And there's sort of a signal here you can see from all these, from the New York Times, Fox News, and all these others, which is, they're all averaging out here to this 2.7, which is lower than what it was under Biden, because under Biden, you were seeing Trump's lead outside of this margin of error of around 3 points. This is just inside, a 3-point margin of error. So, statistically, technically tied, but the direction of all these polls is telling you that Trump is leading in Pennsylvania right now. So that is why many observers think that Kamala Harris is going to name Josh Shapiro as her VP because she has to right the ship over here in Pennsylvania. If she wants any chance to win, she needs to win it. Shapiro is a broadly popular governor. I think it would be my practice not to pick him, but we'll see what she does. We're going to find out over the weekend. Right now, Trump holds a lead. So, prior to the VP announcement, this is a very loud emergency signal for the Harris campaign. They are losing in Pennsylvania right now. Next up, Wisconsin. So this has always been a very tight race, both with Biden in the race and now with Harris. You'll note here Trump has 3 polls where he's up by 1. Harris has 1 where she's up by 2. And then we have a tie race here with the Hill and Emerson. So Bloomberg Morning Consult here, the latest one, they have Harris up by +2. That's a reasonable call. If you look at some of the Bloomberg polling, they tend to believe it's going to be a Harris +1, +2 environment. Wisconsin is generally a middle of the line state in elections right now. So this would mirror kind of what their national poll would say. Not really surprised there, but if you average everything out, it's a dead heat, 0.2. And if you look back at 2016 when Donald Trump won, these were the types of margins that we were talking about when he won in 16. And it wasn't much difference in some of these states when Biden won in 2020. So this right here, I have no problem believing if it's a 0.2 rates, that's a statistical tie. And both candidates should probably live in both Wisconsin and Pennsylvania if they expect to have anything going for them. Next up is Michigan. So this is one that was very weird because you'll notice here in the Bloomberg Morning Consult poll, they have Harris up by 11 points in Michigan. And that is well outside the realm of what anyone would expect here. So here's the easy way to read this. You can either have in these polls, you can have, if you want to say Harris is up by 11 in Michigan, that's fine. I have no problem with you saying that. That's fine. There were polls in 2020 that showed Donald Trump losing places like Wisconsin by 20 points, and everyone knew immediately as soon as those were released, that was a bad poll. You could say Harris is up at 11 in Michigan. That's fine. You can't then also say that Wisconsin is at a dead heat here at +2 and Pennsylvania is going to Trump. These states tend to align with each other where one tips, the other is going to tip. And that's because they're similar demographically. There are similar voting bases. There are similar just demographic things happening across all these states. So you have, the general Rust Belt things, especially once you get outside the far east in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. If you get into the western part of the state with Pittsburgh, you're talking about a lot of rural voters. You're talking about that blue collar type vote, and that stretches from there all the way across Michigan, Wisconsin, and the rest. So if you want to say, you can either have Trump up here in Pennsylvania or you can have Michigan +11. These things are mutually exclusive. I have no problem believing that Kamala Harris can win Michigan. I do not believe this is a +11 race here. And if it is a +11, if this poll is true, it means the other polls in these other states are inaccurate. So this is interesting because it tells you that Harris has gotten a bump back in Michigan, perhaps. But it's more than likely, if she is, it's closer here to this +2 because it is hard to believe a +11 in Michigan. In Arizona, you see a little bit more of a reasonable thing here with a Harris +2. The Bloomberg Morning Consult is showing her up. This is against the other polls that have been running out there from the Hill, Insider Advantage, which leans towards Republicans. And then this is PPP is a Democratic polling firm. They had, this is before the dropout, but they had Trump leading by 8. But they did test Harris in the race out here before Biden dropped out, and they had Trump up by 8. So the Bloomberg Morning Consult is the outlier here with the Harris +2. Right now, if you're looking at the averages, you would say, well, we need a lot more polling in Arizona, and I would agree with that. But right now, you would expect Trump to have an edge in Arizona, and that's good for him. And you'll note here, you have the highest margin of error here is around 3.5. Trump's lead is a 4. So we're outside right now of the general margin of error that across all these polls. So this is leaning towards Trump. And when you're talking about if Trump has a place like Pennsylvania and he has in Arizona, he's really close across the battlegrounds for taking the lead. Next up, Nevada, another state that needs a lot of polling here that has not had anything recently. You have the Bloomberg Consult poll, which is showing the same thing that it did in Arizona, which is a Harris +2. The other more recent poll here is an Insider Advantage poll, which shows Trump up by 10. These are just the only ones that tested a Trump versus Harris poll, so we haven't had a lot here. I believe they tested, we'll just go ahead and open this here, Trump versus Biden. Yes, they did. So when you're looking at Nevada, when Trump versus Biden, Trump was already showing a fairly significant lead across the board, but these are obviously older polls going back. But this is important to note because it shows Trump and his lead. So we'll see if he's able to maintain that. Right now, we only have 2 polls in Pennsylvania, a +10 and a +2. That's a pretty big split. They could be telling you anything. And so I would just call both of these very noisy. Insider Advantage, I consider a Republican polling firm. Bloomberg is the public one here. So I would give more credence to theirs, but still, we need more than just 2 polls in the state of Nevada. It's a notoriously difficult state to poll, but we do need more done out here. So those are some of the main battlegrounds. We can look at some of these others. I'm not expecting North Carolina or Georgia to be competitive. There are polls. The Bloomberg Morning Consult polls now says this race is tied. This would be at odds with basically all other polling that we showed before Harris got in, which even before the debate, which was that Georgia was not going to be a contested state. Harris may narrow the lead here a little bit, but I'm not expecting Georgia to be a competitive state. The same would be true of North Carolina, where all polls have generally shown Trump with a fairly significant lead here. Right now, he's averaging 5.5, and that's with the most recent one being this Bloomberg poll here showing him up by 2. So I'm not expecting North Carolina to be a significant swing state, even though Harris is going to run through there. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we are across all of these swing states. Remember, though, Pennsylvania is the most important one here. If everyone's saying Trump is winning in Pennsylvania, that changes the map and tilts it in Trump's favor in a very decisive fashion, because those are 19 electoral votes. I'll cover, in future and coming weeks, more maps to show you why that's the case. I did last week. This week, we're just kind of covering the polls, sort of covering Kamala Harris. We're going to wrap up here with one other point here, and that's a quick look at 2020. So in 2020, Trump versus Biden, at this point in the race, you were looking at a fairly significant lead. Biden was going to end up winning by 4.5 in the national popular vote. I want to keep that number in your head, because when you come over here and look at Clinton, the final results for her were winning the national popular vote by 2.1 points. This 2-point swing here is key. So you got 2.1 for Clinton and 4.5 for Biden. In order for Kamala Harris to win, she has to outperform Hillary Clinton. Clinton won by around 2.1 points. If you read Nate Silver this week, he said that he thought that Kamala Harris needed to hit that number, around this number, to basically have things at a toss-up in the Electoral College. And it's true. In 2016, there were several states that were effectively a toss-up, and Trump managed to win those key toss-up states. But if you really want to make sure you win, you need to have these Biden numbers here, where you're moving 2 points in the electorate towards the left. So Biden was able to do that, and that shifted things across the board for him in all of these swing states. So when we're talking about, this is probably the lowest bar possible of 2.1, and then looking at where things are at Trump plus 2, even if you accept this is accurate right here, Harris plus 1. Let's say Morning Consult and Reuters have this nailed, that it's a Harris plus 1 environment. That is running a point behind where Hillary Clinton was in 2016. And so if not only you don't get that move to the left that she needs, but also she's underperforming, you would expect Donald Trump to win, because that would tilt the 2016 demographics even more towards him, and that would increase his lead and his margins in the Electoral College. So the margins that we're talking about here are very important. If Harris is running below 2016 Clinton, it is far more likely that she's going to lose. And that's why you've seen Nate Silver in his model say she only has around, when I wrote my column, it was around 38% chance to win. He updated today, and it was around 43% chance. That's still, not above 50. So in a majority of the simulations that he's running, Donald Trump is winning. And that's because of these numbers right here. You would expect, if Harris is running below this 2.1 number here, she would in fact lose, because she would not have the margins necessary to capture some of these states. And you can sort of see that bearing fruit here in places like Pennsylvania, where Trump is showing a strong lead. You're seeing, again, in Wisconsin, this is looking a lot more like 2016, where it was a razor thin margin, but Trump had a slight edge. You can look at this in Arizona. It was a similar story there. And North Carolina and Georgia were not very competitive in 2016. So this is what we're looking at here. if it's truly a Trump plus two environment, and there are indications to say that that is the case, then this is bad for Harris because she's running significantly behind. So if these numbers are wrong and this is true, and Trump actually walks away with the popular vote victory, you're looking at Trump taking pretty much all of these swing states, with the exception of maybe one or two. And he doesn't need all of them. If he, like I said, if he captures Pennsylvania or some of these others, he's going to unlock the White House again, and that's going to be all she wrote for him. So this is your broad overview of where things stand as before, before Harris announces her vice presidential election or her selection. We're looking at a Trump plus two environment. Harris has to improve on that or win a decisive advantage in some of these swing states. So if she's going to do that, I think she needs to name Josh Shapiro this next week. If she doesn't, then she names Mark Kelly, the senator out in Arizona. That suggests that they're going an alternate route, and they're taking a much harder route through the upper Midwest. Mark Kelly is a plan to try to win Arizona and Nevada, and then try to make Georgia and North Carolina more the key parts of this race instead of the upper Midwest. That is a harder road for them to take. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The race is going to start and finish, in my mind, in Pennsylvania. That's why they're announcing their best presidential pick in Pennsylvania, and everything is going to happen there. So keep an eye on Pennsylvania, watch the polls that are coming out there, and instead of watching, all the stories about these individual polls, keep watching the averages, because that's going to tell you more than anything else. That's all I've got for tonight, and I will talk to you guys on the next stream.